The person I chose my study over is author-illustrator Melissa Sweet because I found her illustration technique of collage, watercolor, and sketches very captivating. Um, she uses mixed media to create collages that causes one's eyes to dance across the page. Melissa Sweet's illustrations have been predominantly linked to biographies written for children. She is known for her extensive research of her subjects, and many of her collages um, are filled with memorabilia of her subjects or of who the biographies are about. Melissa Sweet was born January 1st, 1956, in Wyckoff, New Jersey. She studied at the Art Institute of Kansas City, and she now lives in Rockport, Maine, with her husband and dogs. She was the illustrator for the 2008 and 2015 Caldecott Honor Book winners, A River of Words, The Story of William Carlos Williams, and The Right Word, Rose and His Thesaurus, both by Jen Bryant. She also won the 2012 Robert F. Sibert Medal for Balloons Over Broadway, a book that she authored and illustrated. Melissa Sweet has illustrated for nearly 100 children's books, including 3 works that she also wrote: Tupelo Rides the Rails, Some Rider, The Story of E.B. White, and Balloons Over Broadway, The True Story of the Puppeteer of Macy's Parade. Her collages and paintings have appeared in the New York Times, Martha Stewart Living, on Madison Park Greetings and Smilebox Greeting Cards, and E.E. Boo Toys. Some Rider, The Story of E.B. White, is a great example of Sweet's ability to capture her subject through her collages. And I'm going to read chapter 9 about writing Charlotte's Web. Chapter 9, Charlotte's Web. One October evening, Andy watched a spider spin an egg sac and deposit her egg. A few days later, he carefully detached the egg sac, put it in an old candy box with air holes, and brought it with him back to New York. He left it in his dresser, and a few weeks later, he noticed hundreds of tiny spiders coming out of the air holes and stringing lines from the box to his mirror, his comb, his brush. An entomologist from the Museum of Natural History helped him identify the spider as Araenia cabbatica, a plain gray spider that prefers shady situations. It lives in houses and barns in northern New England. Its webs are sometimes very large. Later, back in Maine, as Andy was bringing a pail of slop to the barn, an idea struck him. He wanted to write a story about animals. He needed a way to save a pig's life. Could a spider save a pig? He wrote to his editor, Ursula, to ask if there had ever been a spider as a main character in a children's book. Not as far as she knew, she said, or at least not since Miss Muffet. In October 1949, he wrote his publisher, Cass Canfield, "My next book is in sight. I look at it in every day. I keep it in a carton, as you would a kitten." Andy spent the year studying spiders. "In this," he wrote, "I found the key to the story. Andy would not make his heroine Charlotte A. Cavaca conform to his narrative. His story would have to adapt to how spiders behave. For example, Andy learned that some male species of spiders dance. So in one draft, Charlotte tells Wilbur the pig that her husband was some dancer. When Fern listens as Charlotte tells the barn animals how her cousin cast a web that caught a fish, Andy was being true to spiders, because in rare cases, spiders have caught small birds and fish. And when Wilbur takes Charlotte's egg sac to the farm in his mouth, it makes sense because A. cavatica's egg sacs are waterproof. Wish you could be here today to see my characters in the flesh. Had a lamb arrive yesterday morning at breakfast time. A boy. He's already out in the barnyard playing in a snowdrift. 2 of my geese are nesting, one of them right in the sheep shed, the other atop a manure pile. Charlotte's children are due shortly. It's quite a day here today. Letters of E.B. White, 1952. When Andy had finished the story in 1951, he wrote to Ursula that a draft was complete, but he wasn't quite satisfied with it, so he had set it aside to let it ripen. Months later, though the tale still featured the barn and its animals, Andy had added 5 more chapters to give Fern more importance in the story. And he kept struggling with the first line. He began, Charlotte was a gray spider who lived in the doorway of a barn. Then he tried, I shall speak first of Wilbur. Then, a barn can have a horse in it, and a barn can have a cow in it, and a barn can have hens scratching in the chaff and swallows flying in and out of the door. But if a barn hasn't got a pig in it, it is hardly worth talking about. After setting aside the story for a year, he tried. At midnight, John Arable pulled his boots on, lit a lantern, and walked out to the hog house. Last, White cut to the action and tried, Where's Papa going with that hand axe? Then, shortening it to, Where's Papa going with that axe? These are handwritten notes, manuscripts for Charlotte's Web, beginning the story with Charlotte the Spider. Chapter 1, Escape. Chapter 1, The Barn. Another draft with Wilbur the Pig beginning the story. Another first page of Charlotte's Web beginning with a description of the barn, leading to the introduction of Wilbur. Note White's drawing of Charlotte in the upper left-hand corner. Chapter 1, Midnight. After setting the story aside for a year, White began his draft with the Arable family and places the animals in the background. One of the final typewritten drafts for Charlotte's Web. There were at least 7 drafts previous to this one. After revising for another year, Andy sent the final manuscript to Ursula. She loved it immediately and did not recommend changing a word. But after she saw a printer's proof, she wrote to Catherine urging the Whites to consider one important alteration, changing the title of the second to last chapter from The Death of Charlotte to Last Day, as to not give away the ending. Garth Williams agreed to illustrate Charlotte's Web, describing the story as just perfect. Andy wanted Charlotte's character to be both beguiling and a New Englander, precise and disciplined. Garth based Fern on his daughter Fiona, but he struggled with drawing Charlotte. He tried putting a human face on Charlotte. That was not the look Andy was after. Andy then sent Garth 2 spider books for reference. Garth later described them as gruesome. There's a very funny picture in this book that I think Garth should see. It is the eyes and hair are quite fetching. Plate 1 shows an orb web covered with dew. Letters of E.B. White, 1952. Orb web covered with dew. Garth wrote, I struggled to invent a lovable spider face. Finally, I gave her a Mona Lisa face, as she is, after all, the heroine of the story. Many sketches later, Garth had her almost perfectly rendered when Andy added 2 eyes and 3 hairs to Garth's drawing. Now she was pretty and a New Englander. Charlotte's Web was finally released in 1952. Above left, Garth Williams' sketches begin with human faces. Above, his later rendering, inspired by the Mona Lisa. Left, the final drawing of Charlotte as she appears in Charlotte's Web. Of the final drawing, Garth wrote, White accepted accurate rendition of the Araenia Cabbatica. Note White's 3 hairs and 2 tiny eyes looking downward added to Charlotte's face. Charlotte's Web, 1952. Why did you do all this for me? He asked. I don't deserve it. I've never done anything for you. You have been my friend, replied Charlotte. That in itself is a tremendous thing. I wove my webs for you because I liked you. After all, what's a life anyway? We're born, we live a little while, we die. A spider's life can't help being something of a mess, with all this trapping and eating flies. By helping you, perhaps I was trying to lift up my life a trifle. Heaven knows anyone's life can stand a little of that. Some Writer, The Story of E.B. White, illustrated and written by Melissa Sweet. My activity was inspired by Balloons Over Broadway. Melissa Sweet used her method for learning about her subjects. She made toys like her subject Tony Sarge and puppets, and so I watched a video on Kids Art Hub YouTube channel, or actually Art Hub for Kids on YouTube. It's a channel of a little boy and his dad, and they do step-by-step drawings of many different things. So older students can use that channel to draw whatever character they would like for their puppet. And younger students can either maybe do a color page and then cut out and bring their puppets to life in their own way. There's also a Balloons Over Broadway activity kit found at fliphtml5.com, and they have Melissa Sweet illustrations that they can color and use as puppets, and they have different types of puppets that they can make out of that activity kit.